Thanks very much for coming to Green Christians Annual Members Conference this afternoon, or to be this afternoon. Many of you were here this morning anyway for the kind of morning session, which was the kind of, the business session when we looked at what we've been doing over the past year. But this is a huge, I think for all of us in the planning team and beyond, this is a big afternoon, and we're absolutely delighted to have such eminent speakers. I'm going to invite two people to come up. First of all, I have to invite Martin to come up. Martin is the vicar here who's very kindly hosting this event. Martin, would you like to say a few words?
Okay, so I think a couple of things I'd want to say, and I'll keep it short, which one or two people in the church who know me will probably be aghast about. But first of all, I want to make it clear, I'm the sort of priest who is very clear this is God's church, so you already belong here. But on behalf of the congregation here at St. Mark's, let me give you a warm welcome. This is God's church, just as we all know, it's God's world, not ours. The other thing, I'm not going to bore you to death with the history of St. Mark's. Probably, I've only been here 3 years. I don't know it all. Well, at least not in that way. It's the first Victorian church built in Peterborough. But of course, when you've got a building the age of the cathedral, this is really modern. But it's absolute pleasure to have you all here. Do feel free to, just, as I said, it's God's church. Be at home. You're welcome.
Thanks very much, Martin. And also I'd invite Andrew, Green Christians Chaplain, to say an opening prayer to the conference. Thanks very much, Andrew.
In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while the wind from God swept over the face of the waters. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. I am the Alpha and the Omega, says the Lord God, who is and who was and who is to come. We begin this day together, aware that we cannot know all that is to come, but we can trust in the goodness that brings life into being, and that even in the most frightening of situations, a deeper resourcefulness opens up. I invite you to be still for a moment. In the beginning, a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. The Word is, was, and is to come. Jesus says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Do not let your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid." Would you like to stand, please? The peace of the Lord be always with you. Please turn to your neighbour and exchange the peace, and make sure you know your neighbour's name.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. As I said before, we're delighted to have so many eminent speakers here this afternoon. And I'm just going to say a few words I'm sure you're aware of Rupert and the work that he's been doing. Rupert is a writer, a philosopher, an environmentalist, co-founder of the Climate Majority Project, whose SAFER campaign calls for strategic adaptation for emergency resilience. It's the UK's first national campaign on adaptation. SAFER calls for climate resilience to be a national priority, practically, properly funded and locally led. And Green Christian is proud to support that work. We also have later in the afternoon, we have 3 speakers. We have Joe Chamberlain and Adrian Fox, who are national officers for the Church of England's Environment Programme, who will share their leading edge work preparing congregations for climate resilience. And also the Reverend Vanessa Elston is a pioneer priest and part-time chaplain to the Bishop of Kingston. Vanessa will be bringing perspectives from both pastoral care and mission. And finally, I'm now going to hand over this mic to Melanie, Melanie Nazareth is barrister and leading on Green Christians Churches project, and she'll be chairing the rest of the conference. I don't know if you want to say anything now, Melanie, or shall I just hand over?
Thank you. Oh my, this is a bit tall, but we'll go with it. So I just wanted to say hello and that I'm really, really excited for this conference. And I hope that you will feel engaged and empowered by it. It couldn't be more needed at this point in time. Government, both national and local, is failing to deliver, and it really is time for us in our communities to step up. And today we're going to be looking at the unique role of churches in supporting their wider community to navigate the escalating impacts of the climate crisis in their local areas. And climate change is already impacting communities in the UK. So how do churches help society to adapt from flooding and food insecurity to social disruption and anxiety? And building on a recognition that many, many congregations already play a vital leadership role in their communities, meeting the practical and spiritual and emotional needs. What we want to do today is to think together about how this might need to evolve and shift. And we'll hear from the 4 speakers, we'll have a panel Q&A, and then we'll harvest the wisdom of the room, your thoughts, your ideas, before returning for a plenary session. Our first keynote speaker, Rupert Read, has already been introduced to you by George, but I'd like to add my welcome to Rupert. So, Rupert, the floor is yours.
People say we're heading towards a cliff edge. Trouble is, that really doesn't capture it. That really doesn't capture the gravity of our predicament. If you want to talk about a cliff edge, we're already off it. As things stand, we're headed straight towards collapse, whether it comes from climate, AI, geopolitics, or most likely some cascading combination of these. This civilizational crisis is at root a spiritual crisis. It is a crisis of what we are living for, of what may be worth dying for, and of what most deeply is. So, a thesis. Any spirituality or religion now must be engaged with the lived world, with practice, with humanity, with what is now. Any spirituality that, by contrast, seeks to be a retreat from engagement with life is really an evasion of our incarnation. With the rise of artificial intelligence, it's more important than ever that we recognize and celebrate our incarnate, utterly embodied nature. And here I think of the fantastic slogan of Christian Aid, possibly the best slogan there has ever been. We believe in life before death. The great question of our time, for everyone, is, what will you do to make meaning out of our tragic contemporary predicament? How will you respond to it with all your being, standing with others? Everyone is enjoined to face into the abyss and to find your power, your USP. And, as we might put it, your climate sweet spot, where your talents and your passion meet the crying need of our place, our people, and our planet. An example, for artists, it's about the meaning of their work. It's about what their work is about, what it helpfully says about this matter, how it points a pathway through what is coming. That's the unique contribution and power of artists. It's about the meaning they crystallize far more than it's about their carbon footprint or whatever in making their works. And for religions, for Christianity, well, somewhat similarly. It's about your uniquely respected pastoral and preaching voice. That's the great question of our time, the question of what are you going to contribute, how are you going to make meaning out of it? And that question is doubly so for you. It's doubly so for us, people who have chosen to gather in this hall here today, because making meaning out of difficulty is our job. It's not about changing your light bulbs to more energy efficient ones. The real light bulb moment is when you realize that changing the light bulbs, etc., is barely the beginning of what is needed, and that it can even be a distraction. One might hazard that changing the light bulbs or even installing solar panels is mainly something we quite sensibly do to show congruence, to show willing. But light bulbs have very little power to persuade. The true power is the pulpit. That is your USP. Your historic role in this epochal and terrible civilizational moment is to reclaim spiritual leadership, to address the spiritual crisis head on by evoking something like what I call eco-spirituality, or as it's sometimes termed, dark green religion. And that is my central point. If you can remember only one thing from my talk, let it be that. Your role is nothing less than unapologetically to reclaim vocal leadership. But there's another absolutely key point adjacent. If you've room to remember two things from this talk, remember also this. More important than churches showing a little leadership by reducing their footprint or by rewilding is they're manifesting some leadership by becoming hubs for community resilience in the face of stress and of actual and potential disasters. Why? Well, for a couple of interrelated reasons. Firstly, because doing so manifests the severity of the crisis. When one shifts from centering sustainability or carbon reduction, when one shifts from those to centering emergency resilience, then one is showing that one actually gets it, that the age of consequences is here, which means that the age of adaptation is here. Taking resilience seriously is a lived and living wake-up call, and thus accelerates all climate action. And it validates the meant seriousness of one's preaching. When churches get real about climate-driven food price rises, about polycrisis-driven energy price rises, about the rising risks of fire and flood and even famine, then they evoke something increasingly concrete and crucial. And secondly, and more specifically, it's crucial for churches to become community resilience hubs because doing so is quite simply a key way that you can demonstrably and appreciably help. Reducing your church's carbon is a valuable drop in the ocean. The good that it does will be seen in the eyes of God. It won't be visible to parishioners. Becoming a community climate resilience hub, giving, for instance, a warm welcome in winter maybe, or crucially a shared cool place in the ferocious summers to come, makes a far more recognizable difference to people's lives. It's about centering our vulnerability to impacts. It's about responding to those with both vision and practical help. Churches can become community resilience hubs, or what are often now called life houses. And that is how all of this that I'm talking about can come most powerfully and appreciably together. What you preach and what you practice. It's how you can become the heart of the community again in these new times. When you're a life house and you're talking intelligibly about the real need for us to come together as a community in a spirit of love and neighborliness and precaution and preparedness, and you're thus manifesting a live sense of the terrible trouble our species has got itself and everyone else into, then by God, you're doing God's work. You're really leaning into your USP. This good earth which we inhabit is an Eden. But we're being pushed further and further out of the garden by our own actions, and much more so by those of our elites and rulers and markets. This is tragic and must be processed and coped with, and, to the extent it can be, combated. God's creation is being polluted and desecrated. These words should be understood as directly making spiritual claims. We are called, like the Old Testament prophets were called, and as they in turn called out and call out to us. We are called to speak out about this and to act on it like we mean it. Mark my words. In this awesome long time of trial into which we are down going, many, many people will long for spiritual succor. And most of them will find it somewhere. They will find it in the coming pathetic pseudo-religions of AI. Or they'll find it in deeply questionable religious responses that amount to attempts at retreat, escape, denial, diversion. Or they will find it in the likes of, well, us, you. In the Laudato Si, or its recent Islamic equivalent, the Al-Mizan. In the coming dark green religion, or eco-spirituality. If they can't find it in mainstream Christianity, they'll find it instead in Quakerism, or in engaged Buddhism, or in old or new paganisms. A religious revival is coming. The question is whether you will help lead it or be bypassed by it and rendered irrelevant. We need to get back to the garden, or more realistically, to garden in the ruins. We need something like creation care, or what I term spiritual adaptation. We need to show up for the hard work of existential leadership in this time of existential threat, increasingly palpable and dire. We need to show up to adapt ourselves together to the new, hard-to-face state of the world, a world facing, almost for sure now, collapse events. The ending of this civilization by fire or ice or transformative adaptation. We need to pause, to look into the abyss, to say what we see. We need then to struggle on determinedly, rather than seeking a reprieve. We need to be showing up and stepping up, rather than, of course, giving up. We need to give of ourselves like we've never done before. The neat thing is that we can and should do so in a way that protects ourselves too. This is part of what is so necessary about the spirit of what in the Climate Majority Project we call strategic adaptation for emergency resilience, which conveniently abbreviates to SAFER. Deftly combining principle and pragmatism. We preach and practice, we protect, including our very selves, and finally, we maybe even flourish as we re-find meaning. All of this at the very same time. And if I may make so bold, our focus in the Climate Majority Project on the hard, shared inner dimension of adaptation, on strategic and transformative adaptation to what is and what's coming, and on building resilience together, resilience to the climate disasters incoming, and to the chronic condition of the long emergency dawning, having ruptured the planet's boundaries. If I may say so, our focus is about right. For we are focusing on what is neglected, what's increasingly pressing, and what is going to be increasingly determinative. We are focusing on what it is so telling that humanity doesn't focus on nearly enough, on the conditions for our life itself, on the more than human. Whereas, ironically, when I look at religion, too often I see only what is human, all too human. We see sad evidence in some quarters, of course, of sexual abuse, of abuse of authority. But more, I see especially a focus upon sex. Now, don't get me wrong, sex matters. It is an essential dimension of our incarnation. At the start of this talk, I spoke briefly of celebrating our incarnate, intrinsically embodied nature. I don't sense enough of this in Christianity, not nearly enough. What I sense much more often, and this of course has deep historic roots in monotheism, is a kind of regulatory and prohibitional impulse. And that impulse categorically fails to connect with what our sexuality most profoundly is. A sacral experience, a portal, literally, to the divine, a way of being transcendent and earthed. What disturbs me the most of all about the way in which Christianity expresses sometimes an almost obsessional or even prurient interest in sexuality, and now perhaps in gender identity, is the way in which such a focus takes our attention away from the other than human. When we focus our energy on whether or not women should be allowed to be priests, or on whether gay sex can be equal in God's eye, or most of all, perhaps, on the highly vexed trans debate, then for me what is most concerning is that we are focusing narrowly upon ourselves. Such excessive self-referentiality is a form of anthropocentrism, of human narcissism. It is, bluntly, a form of the very disease that is our civilizational crisis. We very badly need to raise our gaze from this divisive self-obsession and instead refocus robustly on an eco-spiritual vision that is capable of helping us and healing us to have a future. Crudely but truly, there's no women's priest debate, there's no trans debate, nor any other debate on a dead planet. So let's truly step up. Let's play our literally vital, specific role in seeking to uphold this staggeringly awesome sphere of life. This is a time of great spiritual testing. Let's be brave enough to step into our full power, the beautiful power of the powerless, the power of truth and authentic voice. Let's be prophets again, warning of dystopia and corruption, calling for throughtopia and transformation. Let me end by briefly recalling Jesus' parable of the talents. This peculiar and even perhaps somewhat seemingly unchristian tale has been interpreted in various ways, including even as a pro-capitalist story. Like many these days, I prefer to read the parable of the talents in something like the way that the great Black American novelist of ecology and collapse and of paths through, Octavia Butler, did. She read it as a call for wise stewardship of resources, including, crucially, of course, so-called natural resources. If we apply the parable of the talents to our treatment of nature today, it is obvious that collectively we've on balance done an atrocious, in fact, despicable job when it comes to husbanding the bounties of this incredible home of ours, Earth. The great work of Christianity now is surely to draw richly on its special resources, on its stories and traditions, on the respect that continues to exist for it, on its whole voice, to channel the cry of the beloved planet, of wonderful life, of the future generations who are asking not to be born into somewhere wrecked. We are being sorely tested, but it doesn't have to be to destruction. If we lead with humility, but also boldness, if we have the courage to love and feel and meditate and pray, and above all, perhaps, not to sell ourselves short, then this time could be the beginning of something great amidst the coming carnage. Even perhaps the beginning of a true revival of Christianity, as itself now perhaps a form of dark green religion, relevant to our time, a time needful of prophecy and revelation, a time needful of a love that dares to speak its name, to be called by its true names, a love and awe that holds everything sacred and that refuses to let this good earth go gentle into endless night. Thank you.
Thank you, Rupert, for those words of wisdom and that quite challenging talk that you just gave. I'm just going to leave a couple of minutes for this to settle so that people can think about this. And then we're going to have a little conversation, and I want to ask you some questions, some of which might be a bit of a challenge to you too.
Great.
Okay, let's just start with this. You talked about the Climate Majority Project, and you are the co-director, and its aims are to accelerate climate action by a broad-based coalition of citizens. Yeah. So my first question is this. Is there still a climate majority in our current political situation? And following on from that, if you think that there is, then how would churches connect with, collaborate with, harness that majority when we find it difficult within our own churches to find people who are like-minded?
Yeah, very good. So to answer your first question, I can be pretty confident and esoteric. Yes, there is absolutely still a climate majority. So you're probably thinking about things like the rise of Trump and the rise of Reform UK in this country as, things that might seem to indicate to people, oh dear, is climate becoming less popular? One thing which is really important to understand about Reform UK is that their policies on climate are unpopular with their own voters, right? If you look at, it's very interesting, if you look at the polling, there are more climate denialists who vote Reform than there are who vote for other parties. But most people who support Reform are not climate denialists at all. And it's actually a potential Achilles heel for a party like Reform UK that they have those policies. The polls are very, very clear. There is a climate majority in every country in the world, virtually, and absolutely in this country. What the Climate Majority Project is seeking to do is to deepen that majority and make it more aware of itself, because a lot of people are still not clear about how much they are in the majority, and provide people with more accessible pathways to action, give them a stronger sense of agency, which is one of the reasons we think work on adaptation is so important, because it provides that sense of agency. And as was implicit in my talk, one of the things we suggest to people is look for where your potential unique contribution is, along with others. So for people who are primarily religiously or spiritually motivated in their life, what I'm inclined to say to such people, and I assume that the vast majority of people in this room fall under that heading, is, the way to go about what needs to be gone about is probably through that religious or spiritual lens. And again, that was clearly part of what I was trying to talk about, and I take it also part of what Green Christian is trying to do. And I think part of the way you should then think about yourselves is as the thin end of a very large wedge, right? As being people who are, if you will, on the right side of history, people who are probably in the things that they want to say and the things that you want to say, and to embody much more with your congregations or whatever it is than you might suppose. People are waiting for leadership. They are hungering for community. They are hungering for meaning. And, well, to put it bluntly, I think that we, in the kind of ways I was gesturing at, can provide those things.
I'd like to quote back to you. That's better, that's on. I'd like to quote back to you something that you wrote in your blog on your website in this context. You said, very recently, so you will remember it, I hope. Yeah. For me, this is the spirit of adaptation at its best, practical, hopeful, and deeply human. Not just resilience in the face of crisis, but renewal of community and nature and their links. And you were talking, I think, at the time to the CEO of the RSPB. But this actually sounds very spiritual. So I want to ask you to just take that idea that there is this spiritual hunger that extends even to organizations like the RSPB. How do you interpret that, and how can we build on that?
Yeah, great. Well, okay, so I thought you were going to try and catch me out there, so I'm relieved that you didn't, Melanie, because I'm happy to stand by that quote. And yeah, look, one of the things that is perhaps a bit unusual about the Climate Majority Project is that we have a theory of change which is quite holistic, and it includes something very prominently in it, which most organizations that seem superficially similar to us don't have, and that is inner work. That is shared inner work as an ineradicable part of civic work, of political work, of movement building. And we believe that it is ineradicable and that it's neglected. And yeah, ultimately it has what I've called a spiritual dimension. So I do this teaching which is called Spiritual Adaptation. There's a few of my graduates in the room doing it again in February in Glenthorne in the Lake District, the Quaker Retreat Center, and I regard that part of my own work as broadly continuous with what the Climate Majority Project is trying to bring. Now, obviously, people are going to find very, very different paths to doing this, right? There's no way that anyone is going to be able to say credibly today, when people do shared inner work in relation to climate, it must be done in a Christian way, or for that matter, it must be done in a Buddhist way, etc. But if people find what Jack Cornfield calls their one seat, their way, their place to sit or to stand, from which they can credibly and authentically lead and offer in the spiritual inner, etc. directions, which they find most powerful, along with others, then that will work for quite a lot of people, and that's what we all need to do. That's what people in Green Christian need to do, and that's what people with other paths or callings need to do in different ways. So yes, in the Climate Majority Project, we believe that the civilizational crisis is profound, that it's not just a matter, for example, as I implied, of putting up a load of solar panels or what have you, that it is profound, that it is going to require us to re-find meaning, that it is going to require shared inner work. Some of that will have a secular form, some of it will have a more explicitly religious or spiritual form. But in one way or another, that something like that kind of pathway is going to be essential.
So I want to talk in a minute about that secular form, but I think you can offer some help to people around this inner work and around the aims of the Climate Majority Project. And I think you've got a sign-up sheet there. So this might be a good time to start passing that
I'd be
around.
very happy to, yes. If you want more info about my work or the CMP's work, then do sign up here. Thank you.
So at about halfway through our conversation, I'd quite like to ask you to tell us what you think a climate resilient community might look like. Because if churches are to be climate resiliency hubs, it's really important to know what the community around them might look like as they progress with this work.
Yeah, good. So I'm going to start by mentioning something quite sort of perhaps bold and difficult, but I think it is an essential dimension of becoming that, or becoming what's now called a lifehouse. And what that is that if you're going to be serious about leaning into this space, one of the things you need to do is try to be prepared for disasters. So what that means is actually kind of having some kind of contingency plans for what you would do if something much more drastic than what we've experienced so far happens. Because, folks, it very likely is going to happen. In this country, we've been basically lucky so far with the climate disasters that we've had. I mean, we've had all sorts of climate disasters, like the 10th anniversary of Storm Desmond is just coming up, for example, which some people here will remember. But we haven't had disasters yet on the scale that they have had them in Spain with, say, Valencia, or the Netherlands and Germany with the epochal floods they had, what was it, a couple of years ago now, or the terrible, terrible wildfires that they had in Greece and Crete and so forth. A lot of Europe now, never mind the rest of the world, has experienced really severe, unprecedented climate disasters. We sort of really haven't so far yet in the UK, but our luck will not hold. And as I implied in my talk also, the future we're facing into, I'm afraid, is not just one of climate disasters. It's not as simple as that. We are likely to have AI-induced disasters as well, speeding towards us in the next few years. We're completely unprepared for those. We're in a very unstable geopolitical situation now. There was an article in the FT yesterday about the extreme vulnerability of the water and sewage system for 3 to 4 million people in London. That vulnerability will likely be tested in future climate events, but it could also be tested by, for example, Russian infiltrators, who will now have had the chance, for example, to have read the FT article, which possibly was a bit unwisely specific about what's about that vulnerability, and to be thinking accordingly. You see where I'm going with this? It is highly likely that there will be unprecedented disasters within the next 5 to 10 years, quite possibly within the next year in this country. One of the things we need to do, if we're serious about community resilience, is try to be prepared for such things. What does that mean in slightly more concrete terms? Well, let me give the example of what happened in Lancaster with the terrible Storm Desmond floods 10 years ago. So the floods swept through Lancaster, and if you know the topography of Lancaster, you will know that basically the river is in a kind of gorge, and so the floods swept through, and very, very few people suffered directly from the floods. But something which is very unwise about the way that the Lancaster had set itself up in terms of its utilities and so forth, was that its main electricity substation was in the gorge, and that was knocked out. So for several days, basically, Lancaster had 0 electrical power. And it was really badly unprepared for that. All sorts of things that I could tell you about. For example, there were buildings it was basically impossible to get into or out of because the doors were electric. The council had lots of emergency plans, but their emergency plans were mainly on laptops, which were now inaccessible. The batteries died very quickly, etc. They didn't have any paper kind of backup systems for any of this and so forth. So just to give one kind of very concrete thing, if you're creating a contingency plan in a church like this for what you would do in the event of a disaster, you need to have a backup system. Don't just have it on a computer, right? And this is quite a sort of small and kind of concrete point, but it's a hugely significant one. And you can start to think the implications going off in all kinds of directions. We need to be prepared for disasters. And part of what that means is we need to be thinking about how will we actually be able, if those disasters hit, to bring our plans into operation. But obviously, as I implied in my talk, there's another dimension to this. Another dimension of how churches, I think, should be prepared for such potential disasters is they should be prepared for offering spiritual, pastoral, religious, etc., leadership and support in such eventualities. Some of you might remember the amazing BBC sort of play/film Threads about the nuclear threat, which, if you haven't seen it, folks, is still incredibly worth seeing. It's very grim. It's not what I call Throughtopian, but it had some very, very deep insights into some of what we may be facing. There is an amazing scene in that film where the church, which has been partly destroyed by the nuclear blast, is having a service very soon after the nuclear blast. That is the kind of thing which I think is highly likely to happen and highly likely to be hugely important. In other words, one of the ways in which I believe that churches should be preparing for potential disasters to come is they should be preparing to be, in both practical terms and in religious terms, in terms of providing some kind of real kind of felt leadership, to be places which people look to and places which have a capacity which is really important for responding to those different interlocking dimensions of what human beings need.
So there's a lot of work to be done. And I think one of the things you said in your talk is that showing up for the hard work is going to be really necessary for people within churches.
Yeah.
We all lead incredibly busy and difficult lives. And I just wanted to talk to you about nourishment and how we find an inner nourishment or even joy in what we do that will enable us to carry on with this work.
Yes.
Have you got anything to offer about that, do you think? I know you come from a spiritual tradition.
Yeah. So for myself, I'm a Quaker, a member of the Religious Society of Friends. I've also got a Buddhist practice, as a number of Quakers have these days. Those kind of influences are important to me in the spiritual adaptation teaching that I do. My teachers, Joanna Macy and Thich Nhat Hanh and others, very important in this regard. I could say more about those things, but there's something else I want to mention, which is I found the way that we set this session up very powerful. I thought it was wonderful to have the poetic quotes from Scripture delivered, if I may say, very well, slowly, with the opportunity to land, real pauses. I thought that the moment of greeting our neighbours and offering each other peace and so on was powerful. These are small, important, real examples of the kind of thing I'm trying to talk about, right? These are ways in which the Christian tradition can ground people and connect people in ways that I think are nourishing. I certainly felt nourished sitting there experiencing that. And yeah, I mean, this comes back to what we were talking about 10 or 15 minutes ago, really, it seems to me. Shared inner work of some kind or another is essential for human beings, and it's certainly essential for any kind of meaningful, transformative change. We have to find that nourishment as we go along. Too much social change and political change has sought to be instrumental, narrowly secular, not looking to people's inner needs, not looking to their needs to be part of something larger. And we can't go on like that.
And it seems to me that quite a lot of this might be about building relationships, both on the personal level and to fulfill ourselves, but also you've been talking a bit about the community model and how to be prepared. Might that also be about making connections?
Of course, yeah.
So local authorities have these plans. Do churches, in your experience, get involved in these backup plans that local authorities have?
To my knowledge, not a huge amount, and there's probably room for more to be done there. Look, in terms of resilience planning and emergency planning, it operates in this country very much in the background. It's not very well resourced. That has to change, as George, I think, said in his opening remarks. That's one of the key things we're pressing for in the Climate Majority project. We need to massively resource these things, but what we also say in our strategic adaptation work is that in the absence at the moment of such massive resourcing and such national political leadership, which there has been bits of in other countries. It started to happen in Spain, for example, partly in response to Valencia. It's happening in a number of Scandinavian countries, which, for example, in 2 Scandinavian countries, they've put through the door of everybody in the country a leaflet saying, here are things that you should do to be prepared for possible coming emergencies, etc. Things to do with, having food supplies, water supplies, torches, things like that. It's just very kind of individual, insufficiently community-oriented, but better than nothing. We've got nothing in this country, nothing that is of that nature. So there needs to be better and higher profile and more resourced local and national contingency planning. And in the absence of that, then it's necessary for us to try to step up within our communities as best we can. And that's one of the ways, as I was saying in my talk, where it seems to me that churches can play a literal potential leadership role in offering something which is seeking to kind of catalyze and relate the community better in a way which has a dimension which is, if you will, inner, and the dimension which is very outer and practical.
It's such a rich and interesting conversation, and I have so many more questions I'd like to ask you. I'd like to ask you about the global context. I'd like to ask you about what you said about human sexuality, but we have run out of time. So I just want to say, firstly, a huge, huge thank you for that. And secondly, you've got some books at the back.
Yes. If anyone's really excited by the things I've said, then on that colourful table at the back there, I've brought along some of my books that are relevant and one of our Climate Majority Project reports. And I am happy to sign them and part with them for a small cash fee, which is always helpful. If anyone is interested. So yeah, I'll before we go to lunch, I'll hang around there for a little while. Some of my books also, if you're very cash-strapped, some of my books are available for free online. You can always Google my books, and literally about half of them are available. I make them available for free download online.
Thank you so much. So can we offer Rupert our warmest and loudest applause by way of thank you?